The sky above the shattered mining moon looked like broken glass scattered across a sea of stars, and below that silent sky walked a human named Jake, his boots crunching over dust and ash while the wind carried the scent of burnt metal and silence. No one else from his team had come this far out into the ruined zone, because most believed the area too dangerous, but Jake had always been the curious kind, the one who stepped further when others turned back, and as he moved carefully through the remains of a collapsed building, his flashlight caught a faint shimmer. Not metal, not rock, but something different, something alive. He stopped breathing for a second and stepped closer, crouching low near a half-buried structure where he saw a pair of violet eyes staring back at him wide and afraid. The girl was thin and wrapped in tattered survival fabric, her skin pale with a slight shimmer, as if it had once known sunlight, but hadn't felt warmth in a long time. She didn't speak, didn't move, and Jake could tell she was scared, not of him, maybe, but of everything else around her, of being seen or taken or forgotten. He slowly removed the pack from his shoulder, placed it gently on the ground, and reached inside, pulling out the emergency thermal towel. It was just a standard issue, nothing special, just something meant to keep warmth close to the body in harsh weather, but at that moment it felt like the only thing he could give. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. Instead, he extended his hand holding the towel open, and the alien girl blinked, her eyes glancing at the fabric, then at his face as if trying to understand the meaning behind the gesture. She didn't take it right away. Her body remained still, her arms tucked tight around herself like she had forgotten how to trust. But Jake stayed there, his arm steady, his breath calm, no fear in his eyes, no anger, only something softer, something patient and human. Then slowly her hand lifted, and with careful fingers she reached forward and touched the edge of the towel. Her touch was light, hesitant, like someone touching memory or hope for the first time in years. Jake let her take it without a word, and as she pulled it close around her shoulders, her expression changed just a little. Not a smile, not relief, but something in between, something that made Jake feel like the world had shifted in a small way. Her eyes didn't look away this time, and they held his gaze longer than before, as if searching for a reason behind his kindness, maybe wondering why a human would offer warmth when her kind had only known distance and silence. She stood up unsteadily, the towel wrapped around her like armor, and took a step toward him, not running, not hiding, simply walking into the unknown with quiet trust. And Jake nodded, just once, turned, and began walking back toward base, never saying a word, because sometimes words weren't needed, not when something more important had already been said. In the simplest way, through a single silent gift, given without expectation, and without knowing why, he felt something change inside him, something small but bright, like the beginning of a story that neither of them understood, yet one that had started. Not with a weapon, not with fear, but with a towel held out under broken stars, and the eyes of someone who had never been given such a simple choice before. Back at the human base, where the walls were cold and the lights never flickered, the girl sat quietly in the corner of Jake's room, wrapped still in the same towel he had offered her on the ruined moon. She had not spoken a word since they arrived, and yet her silence spoke more than any sentence could ever carry. She watched everything around her with sharp eyes, like a creature born in darkness, slowly learning the shape of light again. She never asked for food, never reached out, but Jake noticed how her gaze always lingered on the small details, the steam rising from a mug, way his hands moved when he worked, the quiet hum of the air unit. At night, Jake had cleared a corner for her, placed a spare blanket on the floor, and left a few supplies nearby. And though she never thanked him in words, her hands began to touch the objects, gently arranging them carefully, as if each item had a meaning she was trying to understand. He started calling her Leah because it was better than saying girl or alien, and because it felt right, something soft, something human, something shared. Though she never said it back, she didn't protest either, and in time the name became something they both accepted in the silence they shared. Every evening after the long shift, Jake returned to find her still waiting in the same quiet way, sometimes sitting with her knees pulled up, sometimes standing by the window staring at the stars outside. And each day, He brought something small for her, a piece of fruit, a folded shirt, a chipped bracelet he had made from leftover wire in the tech room. He never knew which gift would matter, but each time he offered something, she took it with the same careful hands, and always with eyes full of something new, something unspoken. Once, when she touched the bracelet, she looked up and held it out like she was asking if it was real, and when he nodded, she held it close, not like a toy or decoration, but like a memory. She wanted to protect that small moment, stayed with Jake longer than he expected, longer than most words ever did, because there was no force, no demand, just a connection that grew like a quiet fire between them, unnoticed by the world, but burning steady inside. One night when the base was silent and the hallway lights dimmed, Leah stepped closer than usual and placed her hand on Jake's table, her fingers tracing the shape of a broken circuit board. Then she touched the towel still folded beside his bed and slowly picked it up. Without a word, she walked over to him and placed it in his hands, her eyes not leaving his face. And Jake froze because the gesture was strange and gentle and full of weight, like she was giving him something, not just returning a cloth but delivering a message. She touched her chest, then pointed to the towel, and then to him, and her voice broke. The silence at last, only a whisper, but strong enough to shake the stillness of the room. She said, "This is sacred now," and Jake didn't know what to say, didn't even try to answer, because something deep inside him understood that she was not just speaking about the towel or the cold or the survival, but about the bond formed in that first moment, when trust was born from a simple gift, given with no reason and no demand. From that night, Leah began to move differently, not just watching but walking beside him when he moved around the room, not hiding when footsteps passed by outside. And once, when he offered her a data slate to draw on, she took it and began to create strange shapes that pulsed with rhythm and meaning, patterns that seemed like maps or songs, or maybe both. And Jake knew that whatever she was sharing was a part of her world, offered freely, the way he had once offered her warmth on a broken moon. The silence between them was no longer empty, now it was full of everything they did not need to say, and Jake found himself thinking about her, even when he was outside repairing old wires or listening to officers talk about new shifts and unknown signals. He no longer saw her as a stranger or a refugee or even an alien. She was Leah, the one who spoke with her eyes, the one who held meaning in silence, and made a simple towel feel like something far greater than comfort or survival. And though the world outside his room remained full of orders and schedules and cold gray walls, inside something warm had begun to grow, not with fire, not with words, but with small gifts and the quiet kind of trust that takes root in silence and changes everything without asking permission. Days continued to pass, and inside the small room on the edge of the base, something rare was unfolding, something that had no name but carried weight. Something quiet yet impossible to ignore. Jake had stopped thinking of Leah as someone he was hiding, and instead began to feel like he was learning to see the world again through her eyes. Her presence changed the shape of every moment, even the ordinary ones. When he ate or worked or simply sat in silence, the room was no longer just a room. It had become a space where two beings from distant worlds learned to exist without needing to explain. Every breath, Leah had grown more confident, her steps more sure, her hands more expressive. She no longer sat still for hours, but walked slowly around the room, touching objects, learning how they worked, sometimes disassembling a tool just to understand its inside parts, then putting it back together better than before. Her fingers moved with skill, her mind sharp and full of depth. And Jake began to understand that this girl, who had once trembled under ruins, held knowledge far beyond what he had imagined. One evening, as rain tapped against the thin metal roof, Leah sat beside the desk with the scanner Jake used during field missions. She picked it up gently and, without asking, began to work on it, unscrewing panels and adjusting circuits. Jake watched in silence, unsure what she was doing, but trusting her hands like he trusted the stars to keep shining. Her movements were precise, as if she knew the language of machines better than words, and when she was done, the scanner pulsed with a soft blue glow, and displayed readings that had never appeared before it could now detect. Underground structures, long-range heat patterns, and even faint energy trails of non-human origin. Jake stared at the screen, stunned by what she had done with nothing more than instinct and memory, and Leah simply handed it back, as if it were nothing more than a returned favor. Her eyes calm, her meaning clear. She was giving something in return. Not out of debt, but out of choice. She understood the gift he once gave her, the towel, the safety, the warmth, and now she was giving something back, not a machine, but trust and proof that she was not helpless or lost, but someone capable of shaping her world. Later that night, Jake sat on the floor as Leah drew patterns in the dust, her fingers moving slowly, her face thoughtful. And then she spoke again, softer than before, but with more strength. She told him that in her culture, physical gifts were not common. They were not exchanged for pleasure or kindness. They were sacred symbols of deep trust, and when someone gave a gift, it was believed they were offering a part of their spirit, something that could never be taken back. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from emotion, as she said that when he gave her the towel, he had unknowingly offered something sacred, and it had changed everything for her. Jake felt the truth of her words deep in his chest, because he had given that towel without thinking, without planning, just a human reaction to cold and fear. But to her it was a bridge, a sign that not all humans brought destruction, not all hands held weapons. Some held warmth, some offered safety without wanting anything back, and that simple act had done something no technology or treaty ever could. Had made her believe in something beyond survival. As days passed, she began to teach him bits of her language, not with sentences, but with symbols and gestures, showing him how meaning flowed through movement and sound and light. And in return, he showed her music, simple songs from his home world, letting her hear the way humans turned emotion into melody, and every moment shared between them built a connection, made not from orders or rules, but from unspoken truths that only grew stronger with time. But outside their quiet space, suspicion had begun to grow. Voices whispered in the halls. Officers noticed Jake's absence during meetings. The secured storage showed signs of activity, and someone had reported unusual energy signals coming from his quarters. The danger was slowly closing in, though neither of them spoke of it. They could feel it, like a shadow stretching across their small world, a reminder that not everyone would understand what they had built or why it mattered. One night, while the lights flickered and the silence grew heavier, Leah sat beside Jake, her voice barely above a whisper, as she asked him a question that carried more weight than any before. Do humans protect what they love? She asked, and Jake looked at her, his throat dry, his heart loud, and said, always, not because it was the right thing to say, but because it was the truth, because what had started with a towel had become something more, a bond built not from blood or duty, but from shared silence, shared warmth, and the simple choice to care when no one else would. And though the walls of their shelter still stood, the world outside was no longer quiet, and the moments ahead would not be easy. But something had changed, something real and strong and impossible to erase. Because when one soul gives and the other understands, it is not just kindness, it is a spark, it is the beginning of something no force in the galaxy can undo. The base no longer felt like a shelter. It had turned into a maze of watching eyes and silent doubts, where whispers crawled through walls and suspicion floated in the air like dust. Jake had started noticing the small signs, the extra patrols in the hallway, the way conversations paused when he entered the room, the questioning glances from officers who used to greet him with ease and now only offered nods that felt cold and cautious. His footsteps grew heavier each day as he returned to his room, where Leah waited with quiet understanding, her presence the only thing that still felt real in a place that was slowly turning against him. She had sensed it too, the shift, the tension that now clung to the corners of their world. Her movements grew sharper, her ears more alert, and her eyes no longer stared out of the window. With calm, they now followed every sound, every signal of danger. She spoke less, but when she did, her words carried purpose, and each one reminded Jake that the time of safety was coming to an end. She had started storing small tools, collecting wires and energy cells, arranging them into strange forms that Jake didn't fully understand but trusted all the same. Then it happened. The knock came, not like before, not friendly or curious, but sharp and direct and final. The door slid open before Jake could even speak, and 3 officers entered dressed in gray suits, their eyes scanning the room as if it belonged to someone else, their voices cold, asking questions with no real interest in answers. They pushed past him and found Leia standing near the desk, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She did not run. She did not hide. She simply looked at them as they raised their weapons and shouted commands in voices louder than needed. Jake tried to speak, tried to stand between them, but they pushed him aside and grabbed her. Arms rough and fast and full of force, he shouted that she was not a threat, that she was a guest, not a spy, not an enemy. But the officers only saw rules and orders, not people, not stories, not truth. They dragged her out of the room, down the hall, and away from everything they had built, and Jake could do nothing but watch as the one light in his world was pulled into shadows. Hours passed inside a holding chamber where Jake was questioned by command faces he had once trusted, now full of doubt. They asked about alien technology, about communication, about secrets he might have shared. They called his actions reckless, irresponsible, even treasonous, and Jake sat in silence, refusing to explain because no answer would make them see what he had seen. No words would convince them that what existed between him and Leia was not a threat, but a bond that mattered more than protocols. But Leia was not silent, not anymore. In the room where they held her, she stood tall and still, and then she spoke in perfect human language, every word clear and full of power. Her voice rang through the bass like a bell cutting through layers of fear and doubt. She spoke of Jake not as a traitor, but as a protector, a giver of light and hope. She told them that humans speak of peace, but forget how to show it, that Jake had done what others would not. He had given without asking, and protected without knowing, and for that she would not stay silent. The officers were stunned not only by her words, but by the very fact that she spoke at all, because her kind were believed to be distant, closed off, unwilling to connect. But she shattered that belief in a single moment, and when they moved her for off-planet transfer, she was ready, not with weapons or violence, but with a plan crafted in silence. She had studied their systems, memorized their routes, and used the tools she had collected, not to harm but to break the walls that held her. In the middle of the transfer, as the ship moved through the dark sky, Leia activated a device hidden in her bracelet. It released a wave of energy that shut down doors and sensors, and in the chaos, she found Jake, broke his restraints, and led him through the emergency corridor into a maintenance shuttle waiting at the edge of the dock. Alarms blared, voices shouted, but they were already gone, flying low across the barren landscape toward the far side of the moon, where the old communication tower stood hidden beneath layers of dust and time inside the shuttle. Her hands moved quickly, powering the console, while Jake steered through storms and broken terrain. And when they finally reached the tower, she handed him the same towel he had once given her, now worn but still strong, and wrapped it around his shoulders. Her eyes calm as she said nothing, because some things did not need to be said anymore. Some things had become more than words, more than rules, more than fear. As they entered the tower and prepared the signal, Leia worked without pause, building a message encoded not only in her language but in Jake's voice, a message to those who still believed in connection, in truth, in peace. And somewhere deep in space someone would hear, and someone would come. But for now they stood together under a broken sky, no longer just human and alien, no longer just giver and receiver, but two beings who had chosen each other against everything that tried to pull them apart. The old communication tower stood tall and forgotten, surrounded by silence and dust, the structure worn by time, yet strong enough to carry the weight of a message across stars. Inside its heart, the air felt heavy with hope and urgency. Jake moved quickly, his hands steady as he connected wires and checked power levels, while Leia stood near the console, her eyes scanning every blinking light, every signal flickering through the system. She had never looked More focused, her calm face lit by soft glows, her fingers dancing across the panel like music made from memory and code. They had no clear plan, only trust and instinct guiding them forward. They knew the human base would not stay quiet for long, and already in the far distance, small flashes marked the skies where patrol ships searched and circled like hunters, moving in closer with every passing hour, but neither of them panicked, not anymore, because fear had no place here, not where choices had already been made and paths already walked. Their minds were no longer trapped by rules. They were following something deeper, something written not on paper but inside the soul. Leah finished the final sequence and nodded at Jake, and without a moment's pause he pressed the transmit key and spoke, not to command, not to officers, but to the stars, to any ear willing to listen. He told the truth in a voice clear and honest. He spoke of kindness and connection, of what it meant to reach across fear and offer something without price. He spoke of Leah not as an outsider, but as someone who reminded him of what it meant to be human, not because of blood or skin, but because of the way she gave without asking and stood without fear. The signal pulsed out into the galaxy, carried by old machines, still loyal to their purpose, and then silence returned, the same deep silence that had followed them from the ruined moon to this forgotten place. But inside that silence was a different sound, a heartbeat shared between them, an understanding that waited without needing promises. They sat side by side, the towel wrapped across their shoulders, fabric worn thin, but still warm, the same gift that had once bridged a gap between two worlds, now holding them together as equals. Hours passed and the skies remained quiet until finally a shadow appeared above the tower, not a human ship, but something older, something smoother, shaped like a drifting shell, its surface glowing with soft light and patterns that moved like living language. It descended slowly, no weapons raised, no demands shouted, only presence, only recognition. Leah stood first, her eyes wide with memory, as if seeing a part of herself that had been lost, now returning from across the stars. Jake watched as the ship opened and a group stepped out, beings shaped like Leah, taller in height, marked with the same violet tones and clear eyes. They did not speak at first, only approached and looked at her with silent questions. And when she lifted the pendant from her neck and held it high, they all lowered their heads in quiet respect, for what she carried was not a signal, not a command, but a message of unity, something far older than any war, a bond created not by force, but by the act of giving. The leader among them stepped forward and reached for her hand, and when Leah turned to Jake, she did not speak with her voice. She let the towel speak instead, placing it slowly into Jake's hands, her fingers brushing his one last time before she stepped back and nodded once softly, not in farewell, but in gratitude, a thank you shaped by silence and time and trust. But the story did not end there, because the ship did not leave without him. Leah had made sure of that. Her signal had not called only her kind. It had called for change, for witness, for peace. And the ones who arrived knew that her story could not be complete without the one who first gave her light. They offered him a place, not as a guest, not as a prisoner, but as something rare, a human who gave without reason and received without fear. Jake stepped onto the ship with the towel still in his hands, and as the doors closed behind him, he looked once more at the tower, at the moon, at the stars, and then forward into a future that had been shaped by something small, something simple, not a weapon, not a command, but a single cloth shared in a moment of compassion, now remembered as the gift that changed everything. And as they flew away together, crossing into unknown stars, Jake understood that some stories begin not with war or glory, but with a choice to care when it is easier not to, and in that choice lies the kind of strength no force can ever break, the kind that lives forever in the quiet bond between two souls who gave each other more than survival, who gave each other hope. The end.